My name is Kate Hanch. My pronouns are she and her, and I am blessed to serve as an associate pastor here at First. And today I am honored to introduce you to one of my favorite people, Reverend Diane Minky Pence. She is a licensed professional counselor in Missouri, an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church, and also an endorsed pastoral counselor in the United Methodist Endorsing Agency. And before retiring, she was appointed to a private practice therapy in St. Charles. And she also, before retiring, she served part-time as an associate pastor at our church. So I was honored to work alongside her for a season. And today we are talking about mental illness. So the first full week of October is Mental Illness Awareness Week. And so I thought it would be nice to talk to a licensed professional counselor about mental illness. So welcome, Diane. And I was wondering, what is the definition of
is a change in a person's behaviors, thoughts, actions, and functioning in life, functioning in work, and functioning in family, and functioning in just general everyday life. That's such a significant change that it keeps them from being the person that they are. Now, that would be considered mental illness, but I'd like to share with you one of the concepts I have of this, because I will tell you that in the mental health profession, many times we don't really like the term mental illness as much as we appreciate and prefer the term mental health concerns, because illness has a stigma to it. And even though it's used in the world, and yes, it is Mental Illness Week coming up here, I want you to know that that's acceptable and it's true, but I prefer to use mental health concerns, and you'll probably hear me say that a lot here. And here's the reason why. I think of mental health as a continuum. I think of optimum mental health at one end, where we're functioning very well and things are going well mentally for us. We're ourselves, we're who we are. And then there's a whole continuum all the way down to severe mental illness, things we think of as like schizophrenia, borderline, or any kind of personality disorder, things that are harder to treat and harder to live with. And in between there's numerous kinds of things that can happen to us that would be mental health concerns. So when we have that change in our thinking and behavior and functioning, and it gets severe enough and it's over a long enough period of time, it becomes chronic, it can become a mental health concern or a mental illness. It can fall into that category, move down the continuum toward mental health concerns or mental illness. And so when that happens, it becomes clinical or diagnosable. And that's oftentimes what we think of as mental illness. However, there's also situational mental health concerns, where something in our environment is causing us to have some of the symptoms that people with more severe mental health concerns have. And it's very appropriate for us to have those. Think of things like grief or natural disaster or COVID-19. We can feel depressed, we can feel anxious, we can feel frustrated or angry. And those are really normal responses, but because they don't go for a long time, they don't get very severe, they would remain situational. They can turn into severe if we don't pay attention to them and deal with them. And that's one of the reasons it's important to be aware of mental health concerns. But for the most part, when they're situational, we deal with them and they do pass over time, but they don't become diagnosable, they don't become clinical. And so that's my way of thinking about mental health concerns and mental illness overall, is to think about this continuum that we can be at any given time, we're anywhere along that continuum. And honestly, some days I'm a little further down than others, and some days I'm a little further up, and some days I dip down a little further than I want to dip. And I think that's true for most of us.
Wow. Well, I will try to correct my language as I go along.
It's helpful, I think.
Yeah, helpful. Because we think of stigmas. So my next question is that what are some common misconceptions or stigmas about mental health concerns or mental illness?
Pastor Kate, that's a great question. And it's really a great question, because when we don't talk about mental health concerns, we believe sometimes the worst, or we believe the things that we hear, and those stigmas get worse and worse and worse. So I think that question is a wonderful one. I'd like to share with you just a couple of those that I think are really common for us. The first is you're either mentally healthy or you're mentally ill. And it's one of the reasons I like to think of that continuum, because it dispels that idea right off the bat. We're very rarely at either end of the spectrum. We're usually somewhere in between. And so it kind of creates, when we think of it that way, it creates a dichotomy of good and bad. If we're not completely mentally healthy, we're mentally ill. And it's just not the case. There's a lot of black and white, and there's a lot of gray in between the black and white. The second one is that mental health concerns are a sign of weakness. I hear this so much. People believe that they're weak if they have a mental health concern. People call people not normal or less than, make people who have mental health concerns can feel that. And the truth of the matter is, mental health concerns are part of who we are, not all of who we are. We aren't depression, we aren't anxiety. They're a part of who we are, and so they don't define us. And they don't mean that we're weak. Honestly, some of my clients are some of the strongest mentally healthy people I know. It takes a lot to deal with a mental health concern, so it takes a lot of strength. So one way to think about it is that, would you say that a person with a broken arm isn't physically strong? No. We can have a mental health concern and still be mentally strong. It's not a sign of weakness. The third one is that people, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's so helpful. I was just affirming what you said.
Great.
Go ahead.
Excellent. I hope it makes sense.
Yes.
I hope it helps us to kind of turn it around and look at it from a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is that people with mental illness are violent or dangerous or scary. And I really think this comes out of two things. I think it comes out of, one, that our media, when we have violence or domestic violence or any kind of violence in our society, oftentimes the media will ask about mental health concerns. We'll associate the two. I'm not blaming the media, but I think that the two get associated in our minds. And I don't think that that's quite fair, because the truth of the matter is and this is from the American Psychological Association, only 7.5% of crimes are directly related to mental health concerns. That's really not what we would probably think of if we were just thinking about it, because of what we hear in our society. And the fourth one that I would like to share with you is that we should not ask people with a mental health concern about how they're doing, because it will make it worse for them. And many people think we should be quiet because there's such a stigma with mental health that if we ask, we're going to embarrass the person, or we're going to make them feel worse about what's going on with them. The truth of the matter is, when we don't ask, oftentimes people who have mental health concerns don't know who they can talk to. When we do ask how they're doing, when we do ask them to explain to us what's going on, they know someone cares, they know someone is there for them, and they know that someone understands. And those things are very healing for people with mental health concerns. So that's a big one for me as a mental health therapist. I think it's beneficial for all of us.
Yes, yes. And especially in the season, as you said, of COVID-19, where we're all in this weird time, and what does normal even mean? Which I guess gets to the next question. If I have a mental health concern, am I not normal?
Normal is such a tough word in the mental health community, because what's normal for you may not be normal for me. And what is normal for anyone? We don't know. I think knowing that, I have it somewhere here. Knowing that 5% of adults experience mental health concerns, mental illness, diagnosable mental illness in any given year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 43.8 million adults in the United States that experience a mental illness or a severe mental health concern diagnosable. And 46.4% of adults experience a mental health concern or diagnosable mental health concern in their lifetime. That's almost half of us. So is it normal? Again, I don't like the word normal, but I think it's common.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I'm sure it'll be helpful for those listening to us. So we talked about common misconceptions and stigmas related to mental health concerns. What are some common misconceptions you hear related to mental health concerns or mental illness and our faith?
That is such a good question too, because I think in the church, sometimes we feel as if we don't know what to do with mental health concerns. We're not sure how to manage them. And the misconceptions definitely impact us on how we interact with people that may have a mental health concern. So I think the first one I would say is the same one that I said in the general mental health misconceptions, and that is we shouldn't talk about it. A lot of churches, not first, but a lot of churches feel, seriously, not first. We talk about it from the pulpit. We have groups that address mental health concerns. We talk about it in various ways, and we serve people with mental health concerns in our community. So First does a good job of doing that, but the church in general sometimes doesn't because we don't know what to do with mental health. So I think if we ignore talking about mental health in the church, we're ignoring our brothers and sisters and family members who need us, who we need to be there for. And we have a Jesus as an example of talking and working with mental health concerns. He comforted and healed people with both physical and mental health concerns. And the Bible calls us to carry one another's burdens. Now, I don't know how we carry one another's burdens if we don't talk about what's going on. And so that misconception really doesn't work well for us if we believe it. So that's an important one. The second one that I'd like to address, it's a toughie, but I've heard many people say, why is God punishing me with this mental health concern? And that's more of that good and bad dichotomy, that if I'm not perfect, then I'm bad. And that's a hard one for us to address sometimes. It also ties into that cultural understanding of if something bad happens to us, we should be blamed for it. And sometimes that can be true. Sometimes we do bad things to ourselves or cause bad things to happen to ourselves. But I know many people who are innocent victims of abuse or violence or manipulation or just accident that have no blame whatsoever in what has happened to their mental health. But and it's not a punishment from God. So my experience is this, and this comes directly from the therapy room. God doesn't punish people with mental illnesses, mental health concerns, any of those things. God is an instrument. God is a loving, caring, connecting, grace-filled part of mental health. And my experience is experiencing God in those ways, not as a person who causes mental illness. And the third one that I hear a lot is that it's a crisis of faith. If we would just believe stronger, if we would just have more faith, we would get over our mental illnesses. And that goes back to the blame game of saying, you're all fully responsible for this. You take care of yourself. And it's just hard on people. We're built for community. We're not built as silos in the world. And we're built for that community where we help one another. So my experience, and this is a little tricky, but my experience of people feeling like they lose their faith comes after they experience mental illness, not they experience a mental illness because they've lost their faith. And oftentimes it's simply because they feel deserted by all the people around them. They don't understand, they don't know what to say, so they don't say anything. And so they just feel alone in their mental health concerns. And when they feel alone, of course, they're going to feel alone from everyone and everything. And that's sad for me. It's one of the reasons my calling was into mental health ministry. I think it's important for us to be there and for the church to be there and for us to be together. And so that one is important. And I think it brings up a really important point, and that is, as Christians, we can be a bridge for those who feel alone, not only in relation to other people, but in relation to God, because God is always there, even when we don't recognize it.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Diane, for sharing your wisdom on this incredibly important topic in this incredibly weird time. So I look forward to hearing from you next week. And let's close with a prayer from the United Methodist Church Discipleship Ministries. So let us pray. For those of us who suffer from some form of mental health concern, we seek your presence in our lives and the lives of our loved ones. Give us courage to face our challenges and open us today to the many ways you are already working in our midst. Help us to identify mental health concerns as the diseases they are, that we may have the courage and wisdom in the face of ignorance and stigma. Inspire us as we seek to overcome fear, acquire knowledge, and advocate for compassionate and enlightened treatment and services. Amen.
Amen.
Grace and peace, friends.